Thank you very much, Mr. Davis. Thank you to you all, and in particular, thank you, Boaz, for inviting me again to this unique and leading world meeting on terrorism and counter-terrorism. I won't be able to offer much added value if I focus on issues addressed by colleagues and friends who are much knowledgeable than me on them. So I would try to add something on the impact of global terrorism by adopting an Spanish perspective, which can be also leading to lessons eventually able to be applied elsewhere. And just 4 points I want to tackle today. The first one is good news when I think about my last speech here a few years ago. And for all of us who not only work on terrorism but counter-terrorism, it is important to note that in my country, the terrorist organization ETA is virtually defeated. No more than 50 militants belong to this group nowadays, so probably within 1 year we might refer here to the disappearance of this long-lasting terrorist organization. ETA has been perpetrating terrorism in Spain for well over 30 years, so after Spain became a democracy, after the Basques elected an autonomous parliament and became an autonomous community within Spain in a referendum approved in 1979. And ever since, ETA, although persisted, had been in constant decline as a result of police and judicial cooperation, action and international cooperation, or also societal reaction. Now, what I want to stress now is that most academics in my field, political science and sociology, will be surprised at what happened with ETA over the past 5 years. And that is that ETA started to seriously thinking about giving up violence. And ETA's political branch, Batasuna, you probably know or heard about it, started to push ETA leaders to give up violence, not because ETA's political branch was offered greater or increased political access or institutional representation, but just because of the contrary. Because ETA's political branch was denied access, political access, and institutional representations as long as they were attached to the terrorist organization, as long as they were cooperating, collaborating to the terrorist organization. So, banning the political branch of the terrorists, in this case at least, generated demobilization, decrease in violence, and finally forced the terrorist organization to start thinking about dissolving itself. My second point concerns also ethno-nationalist terrorism, ETA. I will then refer to jihadist terrorism or global terrorism. And my second point, although refers to ETA, addresses issues of de-radicalization and disengagement. I have been conducting research on de-radicalization and disengagement among members of ETA. The Spanish book appeared just this year, and the English version will be offered by Columbia University Press early next year. And the most relevant conclusion of my empirical study, based on interviews with over 70 ETA members, former ETA members, is that most of them disengage as a result of both or either considerations of the utility of violence, consideration based on efficacy of violence, instrumental considerations, in just a single word, and also discontent, disagreement with the internal workings of the organization and the violence conducted by the type of violence conducted by the organization. So what I want to stress is that, at least from this case study, it became clear that ideological shifts or changes in the belief structures or in the moral justifications of violence was far less important when promoting disengagement than utilitarian, instrumental, or internal organizational considerations. And I brought this into this audience because this seems to suggest a reflection on at least several of the current disengagement and de-radicalization programs worldwide. Are we doing right when de-radicalization and disengagement on religious or moral grounds? Maybe the death of Osama bin Laden will do more to prevent radicalization and to promote this disengagement than many of those programs where we often empower religious figures or Muslim entities and clerics, even with a fundamentalist, though not violent, outlook. Also from a Spanish perspective, a word on the Arab Spring and terrorism. Now, many people discussing about this issue, emphasizing that terrorism played no role, Al-Qaeda or Al-Qaeda-related entities played no role in the mobilizations, in the anti-authoritarian mobilizations in the Arab world, in several countries in the Arab world. Now, one will be advised to go back and have a look on the case of Spain. Terrorism, we had a dictator in Spain, kind of a Gaddafi or a Mubarak in Spain until the middle 70s, General Franco. Probably some of you still remember about this figure. He died in bed, and he died old, and terrorism played no role whatsoever. And as soon as he died, mobilizations were led by the nonviolent opposition to the dictatorship with the purpose of establishing a democratic system in my country. For 2.5 years after Franco's regime was toppled and Franco disappeared, terrorism virtually vanished, decreased, and not only ETA terrorism, but left-wing terrorism. 2.5 years after that, terrorism started an extraordinary escalation. ETA, as well as all the terrorist organizations, says that the opportunities created by the opening of the political system, at the time they thought it was more appropriate and more effective for them to do so. So what ETA did in those days is exactly what Al-Qaeda, or in particular Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, warned us they will be doing, warned us and their followers that they were doing, to seize favorable opportunities, and I quote literally. They might or might not have the human and material resources needed to actually seize those opportunities. But one is at least uncomfortable with several of the news that we are receiving through this Arab Spring period. For instance, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula is gaining terrain in South Yemen. For instance, Al-Qaeda cells have been re-established in the Sinai Peninsula. For instance, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb is gaining access to weapons and other resources left uncontrolled in Libya. For instance, jihadists or former members of the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group and other jihadist entities have been incarcerated in Libya over the past weeks. Even the former commander of the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, probably you know that, has now been appointed military commander of the rebels in the Tripoli area. And I'm referring to Abu Abdullah al-Sadek, also known as Abu Abdullah al-Sadek, Mr. Berhat, whom I had the opportunity to exchange together with Rohan Gunaratne just 1 year ago, where we are both convinced that his profile is not the most adequate for a military establishment in a new Northern African democracy. He was absolutely devoted to the idea that the Gaddafi regime was an Islamic regime, and that was the reason for him to give up violence and jihad. And that was the reason for the Gaddafi regime to excarcerate him. And also, by the way, also he recognized it to me, and Rohan was present at that very moment, that he had contacts with the Tunisian, the ringleader of the Madrid train bombings prior to the bombings. A fourth point I would like to share with you today. This past month, August, we in Spain detained an individual, a Moroccan, who was planning to attack, was a mass casualty attack, a hotel and or a camping facility in Cádiz, in the Cádiz province in south of Spain, a touristic site. His intention was to poison the water system of the hotel and or the camping and killing hundreds of people. Now, the interesting thing about this individual is that he self-radicalized. He was an internet user and abuser. But he was eager to enter in touch and contact and join Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. The individual was arrested or detained in Germany a few days ago. Were also kind of self-radicalized individual, not exactly so, but kind of self-radicalized individual. But they were also eager to go on a training camp facility run by a well-known jihadist organization in the Fatah area in Pakistan. So this means that even for self-radicalized individuals, or individuals radicalized outside the influence of a particular terrorist organization, they tend to look for connections with articulated entities. They value highly organization, leadership, and strategy. And it might be important to remember this nowadays. Nowadays, when Al-Qaeda is weak, when Osama bin Laden is dead, and now that even we Spanish people know for sure, as from December 2009, that the ringleader of the Madrid train bombing network was in contact by internet with Amer el-Assisi, whom we know for sure was Hamza Rabilla's right hand, his closest associate. And that means the man who was in charge of Al-Qaeda's external operation commands, including Western Europe, at the time of the Madrid bombings. So perhaps we shouldn't diminish the importance of organization, leadership, and structure, and avoid making the same mistakes that or some of us made in the past 10 years or so. Oh, by the way, I wasn't able to mention this to my dear colleague Matthew Levitt before, but he say Matthew, he should be somewhere. He said that Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan targeted the West for the first time when the Times Square incident took place. That is not true. Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan was behind the January 2008 suicide bombing plot in the Barcelona metro. That is the first time Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan actually targeted the West. In concerning European jihadism, it is not so frequently mentioned. The fact that the European Union, we are 27 countries, so that means at the end of the day, only 1/3 of those countries really have a problem with jihadist terrorism. Only 1/3. The problem is virtually non-existent in the other countries. An individual perhaps crossing from time to time, but virtually non-existent. Nor even in the European country with the largest Muslim population, really. So we will continue to see in the near future that the UK, France, Spain, Italy, and Germany, closely followed by the Netherlands, Denmark, Sweden, and Belgium, will be those preferred targets for jihadist terrorism in Europe, either from Al-Qaeda or Al-Qaeda-related extensions, more likely, Al-Qaeda-affiliated organizations, even more likely, and individuals, independent cells as well. And this is due to a number of factors. When one is to make sense of this, should rely on a multifactorial explanation involving historical, geographical, socio-demographical, economical, political, and security, thematic even factors. Not all the European countries have the same colonial past in territories with predominantly Islamic population. Not every European country was an Islamic domain in the past. Not every European country has the same proximity to Foci of jihadist terrorist activity. I'm not referring only to Northern Africa. I was just sharing with Professor Dragan Simonovic a few minutes ago on the Balkan foci of this violence and its maybe renewed importance today, as the Germans already know, by the way. Not every European country has the same Muslim populations in absolute and relative terms, not population coming from the same origin. It's not the same to have in my hometown a 10 of the population, immigrant Muslim population coming from Turkey than coming from Pakistan. It is not the same. Not all the European countries have the same global presence nor internalized economy. Not all the European countries have the same amount of troops in Afghanistan or Lebanon. Not all the European countries are combating terrorism with the same strength and determination. When you go and see the figures by Europol, you will notice that a handful of those European countries are arresting people in hundreds over the past 10 years, where other European countries are far more reluctant to do so. When I was on Dati at the ministry, I still remember, now that we refer to European issues of international cooperation, I still remember those European countries which were reluctant to arrest individuals. Instead, they wanted them, or they sent them across the border to the other country, for the other country to take care of it. So as not to accumulate arrests that might create hostility among jihadists. and obviously not referring just to a single case. Not all the countries in Europe have the same problems with respect to the cartoons or the veil and so on. And interestingly, even though a multifactorial analysis makes things quite clear, the interesting thing is that this analysis will not usually correspond to public opinion perceptions on the threat and the evolution of threat in their respective countries. Thank you very much.